Still's Hexa chain. It's been on the market for over 5 years now, so I'm definitely late to the party. But with listings of the 3.8 Low Pro version now on some of the European sites, there's part numbers that exist for it, and there's references as well to 325. It looks like this will be available in more sizes and probably become more common over the next few months or the rest of this year. With that in mind, I thought it's time to actually talk about it. We're going to discuss what it is, what it isn't, some of the claims that have been made about it by Stihl themselves, just generally get a feel for what it is and if it might be the right solution for you. The most important part of this system isn't the chain. At the end of the day, this isn't all that exciting what's going on here. The important part and the interesting part is the file. It is a part that's pretty much universally hated by most people because it is a unique file and is expensive. But the file is this whole system. Let me explain it. So initially when this stuff was released, everyone was excited about the shape. It looks pretty unique. Nothing else really comes sharpened like this. There is factory grinds that sort of replicate this in many different ways, but the shape is kind of unique. And they use that for their marketing. People had all sorts of theories about what it can and can't do. At the end of the day, it's a filing system. The real job of this file is to replace the need to use a file guide. So let's have a look at a few of them. Here we have a few of the common file guides that are out there. So that's a 2-in-1, that's a velour version of a flat gauge, a Stihl version of one, a Husky roller. That is, I don't have any of the original Carlton filer plates. This is a McCulloch branded filer plate that was designed for a safety chain. These tools all have the one job. Their job is to control the height of the file while you're sharpening. It's not this 30-degree angle over the top, like these are marked with, that is difficult for most people. It's being able to consistently control the height of the file. So here I have a few spare links of chain just stuck in a vise so I can show you the problems with filing with a round file. Most people can get this angle. It may be 25, 30, 35, depending on the chain you're sharpening. Most people can get that with some degree of accuracy. Where the problems really start is controlling the height of the file. People will go too high or too low, and it creates problems, which I'll try and demonstrate. This is actually harder than it looks to go too high. I'll start with that because it takes a bit of work for me. Okay, let's have an up-close look at this. So what I've done there is I've filed too high. Believe it or not, this is reasonably common. I will say, however, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've noticed this a lot less than what it was previously. I believe that to be the work mostly of get the gullet idea becoming more common, and that leads to mistake number 2, but for the time being, we'll deal with this. So say you've done that, you've held your file too high. What do you end up with? We end up with a cutter that looks like this. This is your typical ski jump style cutter. If we've gone too high, the corner's leaning back. When it initially makes contact with the wood, there's nothing up there to grab hold. That's dull. There's nothing going on there. So what happens is the cutter rocks back, it impacts the wood, it tries to rock back, it can't engage with anything, and it won't cut. This leads people to trying to apply a lot of pressure to make the chain cut, and it leads to a lot of wear on the heel of the cutter. So that's problem number 1 that you see. The file height has been poorly controlled, it's been held too high. We end up with that, a chain that won't cut. Well, let's look at problem number 2. This is a problem I see more of these days. People have heard that advice that you need to go down, you need to get that gullet. They take it a little too literally. They don't really understand the idea of what was trying to be said, but they think, I've got to go down. I need to get a sharp gullet. That's what matters. This is what happens. My poor files. All right, this is going to be an extreme example because I have dug down quite a lot. We end up with a cutter that looks like this. You can see that top plate is just hanging way out there. If we look at it from the side, look at that. Big problems. This is a chain that will cut like an absolute demon for about 2 seconds, and then it's going to damage itself and just all fall apart. So these are the two extremes of file height control. Realistically, with most people sharpening, they're inconsistent, but only to a smaller degree than this. You generally won't see two extremes like that on the one chain, although I have seen it. What's more common is slight deviations from these two. So I end up with a bunch of cutters, and instead of looking like that, as they should, you'll get one that's a little bit too low and the next one's a little bit too high. And that will carry on through the chain. People will file too low and miss the top plate, the bit that actually cuts. People will file too high, just wipe out the top plate, end up with like a 90-degree top plate cutting angle that won't cut, no corner to grab hold of anything, and yeah, you end up with a chain that's effectively dull, even though you've just sharpened it. So what's the solution to that? That's what every manufacturer has been trying to work out since the beginning. So the file's height and diameter controls the most critical angles on the chain. It's pretty easy to get people to use the right size file because you can sell them that. Where it becomes difficult is trying to get them to control that height. So the solution to that throughout the years has been selling people a guide. You sell them one of these and tell them to go for it, or one of these, or one of those. Now these guides aren't foolproof. People will stuff it up. Instead of holding it, say you're meant to hold it flat or with a slight incline, they'll be all over the place. The file's height as it exits the side plate, as it comes out through here, is important. With these, you can still hold the wrong angles and you can put the wrong angle into the chain. But it's a better solution. The other problem with these is they rely on riding on top of the cutter and on top of the depth gauge. If you run factory specified depth gauges, that's not a problem. If you're outside that range, even for the most part using a progressive depth gauge, these tend to not work as well as possible. They will generally ride too deep if the depth gauges are lower than expected, and if they're higher than expected, they'll ride too high. But they get you within the ballpark. These are pretty good. They will give you what they give you. It mightn't be the exact angles that work best for you and your application, but they do work pretty well. These hold the file height pretty consistently. The way that the slots are cut in, it means it sits lower at the back, so as you work further down the tooth when you're sharpening, it holds the position lower. It's not a bad solution. These things were the ultimate. We'll touch on them soon. So now we understand the problems that exist with trying to sharpen, and we've seen some of the other solutions. What was Stihl's solution to it? Why does Hexa exist? If we look at the patent for it, there's actually describes two different systems. They had two different ideas of how to do this. Their first idea was to take a regular round file, flatten the lower section of the file, create a shelf in the bottom of the cutter that that flat section would ride on, that lowers from the front section of the cutter to the rear the same amount as the top plate clearance angle. If you do this, it maintains that file at the correct height the whole way through because you have something on the bottom to ride on. Now, my understanding is this was attempted in the past. Someone else was working on this, but for the life of me, I cannot remember who. Like everything in the world, everything old becomes new again at some stage. Where have we seen this system before? Where have we seen the idea that we could have something sloping down the same amount as the top plate angle towards the rear and control the height of the file? We have Carlton with his philo plate idea. Like I said, I don't have the full size ones anymore. All I have is the ones that were designed to sit on a safety chain. It'll work for the reference of what we're doing here. So the idea of these guides was to go over the tooth. I'm using this one backwards and middly. They would sit down on top of the tooth. They'd rest on the one in the rear of the one in front. In the case of this, it's meant to sit in a groove that was on a safety chain. As you can see, it drops down on top of it. It creates a shelf that the file then sits on. If we grab our round file, this is the wrong size round file for the job, and stick it in there, you can see we've now got this metal plate that the file rides on as it goes, as you start filing. As you file this cutter further back, this plate sat at the same angle as the top plate cutting angle to control that file's height through the entire length of the chain. That was what Carlton come up with as a solution. Honestly, it's probably the best solution to this I've ever seen. Guys used to carry these things around in their pocket, or they'd stick them in their wallet. They're just a small hardened steel plate. They also were a progressive depth gauge tool, and a very good one at that. It's a shame these are no longer made. They really were a good solution. Back to the Hexa. Half of their patent application actually used a similar technique, except they were going to use a flat section on the bottom of a round file and create that little flat shelf in the bottom. It would have worked in roughly the same way. Now, I can't say for certain, but I'm assuming that idea was dropped due to this keeper trying to maintain the stability of the file as it works back through that cutter. It's not ideal. So their solution was a hexagonal file that has a smooth, flat bottom section. It's an equal-sided hexagon, so everything's 60 degrees. The bottom is flat, it has no teeth cut on it, so it will never try and cut down. When you position this in the bottom of the cutter, it sits flat. It has a consistent item to ride on. The design of this file and the shape allows the point section that forms a side plate here to maintain a reasonably consistent height as it goes back. The tooth does become lower and the file does not, but it's positioned far enough down that side plate that it's not a problem. You can get to the end of life with these and still get the correct angles. This is their solution to file height control. This file is essentially replacing a guide. That is the Stihl Hexa system in a nutshell. There's been a lot of claims made about it. There is differences in the chain that we'll explain, but 99% of this idea is this file. It's the idea that that file rides in the bottom of the gullet on a fixed surface, so it maintains a consistent top plate cutting angle and side plate angle throughout the life of the chain. The file size and the position of the point in the side allows it to maintain that same 60 and 60 degree angle, so a 60 degree top plate cutting angle and a 60 degree filing angle throughout the life of the chain. The majority of people are quite inconsistent with a round file. I don't describe myself as being good at it, but I describe myself as being adequate, and I am inconsistent. I have quite a lot of experience at this. So for someone trying to start out, trying to sharpen chain, they've got no hope, basically. That's why they make all these guides. This replaces that. This gives us a full chisel chain with all the cutting performance that you can get out of one in a very easy, user-friendly design. That is Hexa chain. That should have been the marketing. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But shit happens. When this becomes available in 3/8 low profile, this will be a great way for people who use those little saws to be able to get a good full chisel chain that will remain consistent throughout its life. All right, so some other parts about Hexa. It has a reduced kerf, a slightly reduced kerf. They've done that by reducing the amount of set, which is how far this cutter leans out from the bar. Because they've moved the corners in, they've also allowed them to trim the thickness of the top plate to make them thinner. In theory, this will increase cutting speed due to a reduced friction. Now, I've never really seen that improvement in performance. Every time I've tested this, I've run it on a larger saw and it's plus minus like 5% at worst. Usually it's pretty much dead on to RS. I can make RS cut faster than this. Theoretically, on smaller saws, the smallest saw they actually recommend this for is a 362. But as far as cutting performance goes, don't expect miracles out of that slightly reduced kerf. There is some downsides to it. I cut a lot of wood with very thick fibrous bark. I find as these wear back, they are much more prone to getting hung up. What will happen is the chain will enter the wood and then you'll feel the bar rail get pinched. So it's not a great solution for me. I prefer the full width RS for most of what I do. I have spoken to quite a few people that had similar problems when they're doing face cuts with them. When you're coming down on an angle, it will pinch the bar. To me, this would be more useful if it was just based on the RS chain. Like, I want the full thing, the chassis and the way the cutters sit out, but whatever. It wasn't a bad idea. Chains in general are going that way. Oregon EXL is thinner than the LPX that it replaced. Husky C8385 is thinner than what you consider to be a normal 3/8 chain. They're all becoming ever so slightly thinner. So let's look at the claims that they made for this. The claims they've made have changed over the years. So I've got their current catalogue. It outlines what they say about it. Let's have a quick look at it and a quick discussion about why it may be achieving what they're saying. They give us a big multi-page spread, which is going to be difficult for you guys to see. Here's the big claim. Up to 10% more cutting performance when cutting diagonally. That has changed since the beginning. They initially claimed a 10% improvement, and then it claimed an up to 10% when cutting diagonally. Let's explain that one. Hexa has a 25-degree filing angle, this angle across the top here. RS generally has 30. When you reduce that filing angle across the top, it generally makes the cutters track better. They want to pull out side to side less than they do with more angle. This is why ripping chains are generally done between 0 and 10 degrees, and they end up with a much better finish on the wood. The cutters want to drive themselves out to the sides of the curve or less. When they say when cutting horizontally, when they say cutting diagonally, they're talking about the face cuts when you're falling. The reason that you may see a big improvement there is that reduction in angle. When you're working against that grain like that, it's much harder on the chain. Reducing from a 30 to a 25 degree angle will actually make them track better. That combined with that reduced curve can lead to that performance increase. For the most part, I'm not seeing it when I'm cross-cutting. So one of the other claims with it is that hexagonal tooth stays sharp after 15% longer. This may or may not be true. I couldn't tell you. Reducing that angle from 30 to 25 that they have on this will generally lead to an improvement in durability. But what's 15%? If you need to sharpen this every tank of fuel, is 15% helpful? Like, do you start cutting on the second tank and then touch it up after 10 cuts? Or if you're touching it up after every second tank of fuel, do you now run 2 1/4? 15%, it's not really anything special. I mean, theoretically, if you're removing 15% less damage off a chain every time you're sharpening it, it will add up over time, but who knows? I think the important claims to focus on here is up the top. More effective sharpening results, less frequent resharpening. Now, less frequent resharpening could be due to a claim of it staying sharper longer. I would say most of that comes down to that first point, more effective sharpening results. You are going to be more consistent. You're going to get that 60-60 angle, the 25-60-60 every time with the Hexa. Due to the way this is designed, you can be off vertically. So you can have the file pointed up a bit or down a bit. You're still going to get 60-60. Pretty much no matter what you do, you're going to get that 60-60. So your job now is only controlling that 25. As long as it's sitting flat in the bottom like that, you're good to go. There's really not much else to touch on with this stuff. Like I said, in my mind, this is a filing system. It is a very good filing system. It is going to be an improvement for most people. As long as the application you're using it for doesn't have any issues with it getting hung up with the bars. I should also add, these bars are quite wide, and this is what I'm mostly running on, is this and a 25-inch hard-nosed bar. If you're running laminate bars, you're probably going to be fine. But I've had dramas with the bars that I run. So if it works for you, if you want to run a full chisel chain, this is probably the best way to do it. On the files, yes, they're expensive. It's going to depend on what's available where you live. Every time I've bought this chain, I've bought it in a kit. It comes with 2 chains, a file and a handle, and the cost of that is the same price as buying 2 loots of RS. So in my mind, it's actually pretty good value. I can get these files to last through those 2 chains, only just. This one has pretty much had it. These things dull like square files. The little ridge on the side here becomes dull and it will no longer want to dig in. These surfaces are actually still quite sharp and work well, but that corner, that little point is dull and it becomes very difficult to use. So yeah, it sucks that the files are expensive, but if you look after it, you can generally get through your 2 chains that come in the kit with that file and then replace those 2 chains for the same price as buying 2 chains. Not too bad, comes with a free file essentially. As for the tooth shape being more efficient, that hexa shape, I have not found that. I did this a while ago where I filed one round to see what the difference was and I was getting nothing. There was no difference. The problem is I stuffed up the videos of all of them, they're overexposed and I can't really show anyone them because they're kind of a bit crap. I may do it again. This is the last small loop of it that I have. I may file this round in the future just to have a look to see what happens. But I didn't really notice a difference. I don't really notice it staying sharp any longer. It is very nice to use. No complaints there. But yeah. So that is Stihl Hexa. As it becomes available in different sizes, if you're tempted to try it and you can get it in a kit with the file that includes the file, it may very well be worth it for you. It is a good chain. The only drawback is people misunderstood it. The marketing claims pushed it as something it wasn't. It got a weird reputation. It's going to depend on area, but all the dealers around me that I've spoken to very rarely sell it. It is not popular. And that's a shame. It is a good system. It was just, I think the marketing and some of the other stuff that happened in the early days of it sort of ruined it. When they released it and the files weren't available, that wasn't a big help. People went out and tried to create the shapes themselves. People are trying to replicate it in all sorts of different ways. If you're not using this file, if you're not using this hexa file, I wouldn't bother creating this shape. There's no real benefit to this shape as such. You need this chain and that file to make this really worth it. Otherwise, just sharpen as you normally would. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Stihl Hexa. Took me long enough to get this one out, but that's what it is. That's how it works, and yeah, we'll leave it at that.